Emilio is saying that the recording seems to be stopped, but it is now recording for me. So Lara, just maybe have a look, but it should be working now. So yes, so the way we're gonna go about the next hour is we're gonna have 3 different blocks of input and discussion, and it's gonna be a bit of a ping pong interaction. We have speakers from Malmo and Valencia. I'm gonna introduce them in a second. And the way that we came to the session is that there is a big interest in learning and exchanging about how to engage communities during heat waves and increase preparedness for this climate hazards. And there's quite some learning opportunities between cities that have more or less experience with this phenomenon. And therefore, we would like to first allow our speakers to introduce their experiences, but also challenges on the topic. And then for each block, we will open a discussion with the participants, and there you're really welcome to bring in your perspectives, ask questions, but also if you have other experiences or things that you would like to share, you're very much invited to do so. And the 3 topical blocks that we're going to delve into are, first of all, we'll talk a bit about the context about heat in both Malmo and Valencia, and also in terms of who is vulnerable to heat in these different contexts and where. Then we'll move to a bit more in detail strategies or approaches to reach people and increase heat wave preparedness in the population. And also we'll have a chance to talk about heat culture a bit and what that means in different contexts. And then we'll also go a bit more in the practice of what to do when a heat wave hits. So what strategies are put in place in these 2 different cities to support the population during a heat wave. And then we'll have some time for some closing reflections together. That's all about the agenda. Maybe we move to the next slide for just a quick overview of our speakers today. So we're very happy to have a whole team from Malmo side. They each will have a chance to say a few words about themselves when they start presenting, but just as a quick run through, we have Emanuel Toft, Ludwig Sonnesson from the city of Malmo, also supporting from Matilda Englund, that who's doing her PhD research on this topic, so she'll bring in some insights on that as well. And then from Valencia side, Emilio Cervera is joining from Valencia Clima y Energía, from the Valencia City Council, and is going to bring us some very interesting insights from his city. I will just shut up now and leave the floor to you. We'll start from Malmo, and yeah, we can move to the next slide and let the guests start the presentation.
Thank you, Erica. And yes, as you said, I'm also joined by Emanuel Toft and Matilda Englund. You'll hear more from them soon. And I also have colleagues from the city of Malmö in the audience. So if they will want to add anything during the discussion, please feel free. We are a big organization and many people know many things that I don't know. So just happy that you contribute. And I mean, why we wanted to really do this peer learning session with Valencia is because, I mean, as a Nordic city, we have historically not worked that much with heat. It's quite a new issue for us, but it's becoming ever more prevalent and important for us in terms of city planning, but also in kind of handling disasters when they strike. Unfortunately, our legislation does not really have support for heat resilience. So when it comes to the urban planning side, we kind of lack the framework to properly adapt the city. But we're currently doing a lot of work, and especially Emanuel and Lena, who's also in the audience, and Jonna, are working to kind of see how we could better plan the city for heat. And so we're very curious if there are other examples or insights for how to make sure that buildings that are built newly are better adapted, but also what to do with the existing building stock that might have troubles with indoor temperatures. So we are at the beginning of our journey. And in the Swedish context, we do have an early warning system coordinated by the state that is then dispersed throughout our organization. And we also do inform the citizens, of course, when a heat wave is coming. But that's about the extent that we are currently working with that issue today. And currently, heat is not really included in our general plan, our main strategic document for city planning, but it's our ambition that it will be included in the next general plan. And connecting to what we've done in the Agora project, which is hosting this session, we really focused on social vulnerability to heat as our main kind of perspective when working with heat. In the Swedish context, it's really the vulnerable populations who are at risk during heat waves. And we see that the areas that are highest concentrated in vulnerable populations will be the areas where we will need to do investments and interventions. And so moving forward, we will get a task from our politicians, hopefully in the coming month, to do plans for urban greening, specifically in the areas most vulnerable to heat, both demographically, so socially, but also in terms of canopy cover and heat exposure. And we'll also be trying, as I said, to identify what we can do with our buildings, because we see that as a Nordic country, the indoor temperature is actually one of the bigger problems, because we build our buildings in a way that they're very good during the winter, but we don't really think of the summer in the same way. We have legislation for how much light to be let into the buildings, which also then creates possibilities for a heat trap in those buildings. So these are two things that we are looking at moving forward, and appreciate any insights we can get from you other cities in the meeting today. But Matilda, maybe you can tell us a bit more about how we thought about this vulnerability and what we learned from that process in the Agora project.
Thank you, Ludwig, and thank you for letting me speak today. I truly feel like a mix between an employee at a research institute and the city of Malmö, because we've been working so closely together. So as part of the Agora project, we began with stakeholder workshops to pinpoint who might be vulnerable in the event of a heat wave in Sweden. There's a lot of research on this topic, of course, but not within a Swedish context. And since vulnerability is very context specific, we wanted to explore together with key actors working with different groups in the city who might endure negative impacts in the case of a heat wave. And we took all of this input and created a social vulnerability index, and this has been a quite iterative process. But from the first draft, we decided to do a in-depth case study in Rosengård, which you see there on the map. And just a side note here, this is the latest updated map. In the beginning, this neighborhood was shining bright red. It was very vulnerable because it's a neighborhood with quite weak socioeconomic status, which we believed would impact vulnerability quite a lot. So we assumed this would be a vulnerable neighborhood. But when I went there this summer, talking to citizens, engaging them around this topic, I realized that that wasn't really the case. A lot of the people living in Rosengård come from other places around the globe, a lot of the countries with a warmer climate than Sweden. And for them, heat was not a problem. And I talked to around 100 people, and most did not see the relevance of working with heat resilience in Rosengård. But diving deeper, we saw that some vulnerabilities do exist, that yes, citizens might be heat resilient, but in some of the apartments, the temperatures get so high that it reaches a threshold that no one can really enjoy. So people living in south-facing apartments struggle a lot. And then we had the elderly and the sick, especially people being unable to leave your apartment or perhaps even unable to leave your bed because they couldn't go outside to enjoy a cooler outdoor temperature. And then we had people who were lonely because they didn't have the support network around them to get help from in case they suffered from high temperatures. And then I also talked to some people working within home care. And for them, the workload increased a lot every summer, where new tasks kind of got piled up on each other. They have fewer people working because of the summer holidays, and they have to make sure that their patients are drinking enough water. They need to open and close the windows, give the patients more showers than usual. And also, while doing all of this, they're also biking between the different patients, meaning that they're being exposed to both physical activity, but also the high outdoor temperatures. And with that said, I also noted that outdoor workers suffered a lot, especially those that didn't have the flexibility to adjust their work schedule or work tasks, so they could work in the shadow, but they depended on someone else to make that up for them. So based on all of these insights, we're going to refine the social vulnerability index in the coming years. And once again, through an iterative process where we take these inputs, refine the index, and then talk to citizens whether they agree with this index, why, how, why not, and then update it again to create something holistic and comprehensive. Thank you.
Yes, and if you turn to the next slide. And I mean, our question to Valencia is quite simple. What are the key things you've done in terms of city planning to increase heat resilience that we might be inspired by and might adopt in our own context? Over to you, Emilio.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the Agora project and to the Malmö City and ICLE Europe colleagues for the wonderful organization of this peer learning exchange. And thank you for that question. My name is Emilio Cervera. I work for Valencia Clima y Energía. We are kind of the climate and energy agency of the city. We depend on the city council. We work on climate change and we work on energy transition as well. And in climate change, we work both in mitigation and adaptation. And at the end, this mixture has led to some very interesting, I think, identifying some very interesting synergies between energy, between mitigation, between adaptation that we will be discussing throughout the session today. So in terms of planning, I'm afraid we don't have a one, heat action plan at city level. Some cities do, we don't. But we have several plans or strategies that are addressing heat from multiple perspectives. So you have there some of them, and with the links, the presentation is shared later. So, for instance, our urban strategy has identified as its first challenge to act on climate change. We also have a climate city contract, which was prepared in the framework of the Neutral Cities mission. But since Valencia is also part of the adaptation mission, and we are trying to manage both of them in an integrated way, we also included adaptation actions in our climate city contract. Then we have the Green and Biodiversity Plan, that is kind of our green infrastructure master plan. And its first objective is to adapt the city to the climate emergency. And then we also have the Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan, CCAP, prepared for the Covenant of Mayors, and which many of you might be familiar with it. So yeah, all these plans or strategies in some way are addressing heat. And if you can go on to the next slide, please. But we know that this is not enough. And then we had a very nice opportunity with the Fair Local Green Deals European project to work on this. So what we did with this project was to develop a proposal of priority actions against heat in Valencia with equity criteria that could be included in the climate city contract in future revisions. The Neutral Cities missions allows us to update and review our climate city contract every 2 years. And what we thought is that we needed to identify, and with this just resilience perspective, focusing especially on those who are most vulnerable to heat. So we needed to integrate new actions there. And for that, what we did was to develop an analysis of our first climate city contract and other existing plans, such as the one I just shown, from the perspective of a fair adaptation to heat. Then we developed a diagnosis of heat and vulnerability in Valencia, integrating also previous findings in this regard. We identified potential proposals to tackle heat in Valencia with this equity perspective. And then we developed a participatory prioritization of actions with local stakeholders. And if you can go to the next slide, please. One of the things that we also have been thinking about is who is vulnerable to heat in Valencia. So we have a regional heatwave program that is approved every year, and that gives us like some interesting perspective on this, because it considers that vulnerability to heat should be taken into account from different perspectives. So from a health perspective, it identifies minors, elderly people, and individuals with pre-existing health conditions. But you also, the program also thinks that it needs to be considered from a social perspective. And they're marginalized people, people with support needs or disabilities, low-income individuals or families because of their living conditions, and then people living in urban environments because of the urban heat island effect. And then from a labor perspective, it also identifies the people most exposed to high temperatures due to their jobs also as vulnerable to heat. And yeah, some of this is similar to the what the Malmo colleague just presented. And I highlighted there the urban environments part, because yes, the urban heat island effect should be taken into account, but also we are a city, but not all the urban environment is the same. So we need to think not only about, it's okay, you can go to the next one. We need to think not only about who is vulnerable to heat, but also where is this vulnerability to heat. And if we consider vulnerability to heat as a product of sensitivity and also adaptive capacity, we need to consider that this sensitivity or this adaptive capacity depends not only on the people, but also on the urban environment itself. So with the Fair Local Green Deals project, with this diagnosis we did, we took that into account. So we were thinking not only about socioeconomic or demographic factors that are summarized like in the middle maps, but also about where facilities are, where the sensitive urban environments are that we have identified, where is the green infrastructure itself more vulnerable as a resource to adapt, or where we are lacking this green infrastructure. And also we were looking at the urban morphology, because, and we did this based on the local climate zones model, because depending on these different urban morphologies, you have different sensitivity to heat and also different adaptive capacity. So these are all things that we think should be taken into account, but we are also very curious to see, how the audience thinks on which other factors could be considered when identifying who or where is vulnerability to heat in their cities.
Thank you very much, Emilio. And thank you also to Ludwig and Matilda. I think that maybe we can stop the screen sharing so that people can somehow see each other. And we would open now a bit of a space for discussion. So this was already quite a lot of interesting input from our guest side. And don't be shy if I'm sure there are some questions in the audience. So I would invite you to use the hand raising function or write your questions in the chat. If you would like to know anything more about what was just presented, but also if anybody would like to share about their local approach, so the approach adopted in their local government, or there's quite some participants from research entities or universities. So in case you are also working on this topic and have some interesting insights to share about the topic of vulnerability to heat, this would be the moment to do so. It would be very interesting. And also if like our speakers have some questions for each other, this is also possible to do at this moment. Ludwig, I see Ludwig and Emmanuel, you have your hands raised. Do you want to start, Ludwig?
Yeah, I can start. It's just it was really interesting to see your vulnerability mapped. It feels like we've had similar ideas of what to include, but on the regional context, there have been different data and different ways of thinking about it. And have you used that mapping to guide kind of investments and interventions yet, or is it kind of too early for that?
Yeah, thank you. No, I think it's too early for that. But we indeed think that this should be used to prioritize places for intervention, for instance, in relation to green infrastructure improvement or to other actions that we will be discussing later. So at the end, in some cases, we have been just working with existing vulnerability indices that we have already mapped here in the city. The city has a very nice vulnerability areas dashboard that is updated every 2 years. They have been updating it. So it's based on open data and it's looking at these social, demographic, facilities, vulnerabilities, and then like in an integrated way. And then we also have like some similar dashboards from the national department, but are also going like very into high detail. But then, yes, for this diagnosis we produced as part of the work in the Fair Local Green Deals project, we thought that we needed also to consider all these different things. So we have not developed like a specific social vulnerability index, such as the one Matilda was like discussing just for heat. But we are like seeing all these different factors and how they overlap in the different areas of the city.
All right, I'll go next then. Thank you, Emilius. Super interesting and also very beautiful maps you've created. I was super interested in your mapping of adaptive capacities. Have you looked at like cultural adaptive capacities as well, or just physical adaptive capacities?
Yeah, no, that would be a very nice way to go forward. Thank you for that. I will write that down so I don't forget it. No, for that we have been like mostly checking green infrastructure or, as I said, local climate zones with this urban morphology and these kind of things. But yeah, it would be interesting to see how this cultural part is also like maybe different in different parts of the city.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
That's indeed very interesting. Matilda, do you want to go ahead with your question? Then I'll take one from the chat.
Yes, thank you so much, Erica. So what I'm wondering for both municipalities is what you do with people who might be vulnerable, especially to heat waves, that there's no data for. How do you plan on finding people who are, for example, homeless or, let's say, pregnant and so forth? Do you have specific strategies for that?
I think that for homeless people, we have identified that as a priority area for us to work on because, as you say, like you need probably to define different strategies. What the city has been doing for the last few years is to enable shelter specifically for them during heat waves, like to be able to sleep there because we are having problems with lots of tropical nights. So it's not easy to sleep here now in summer if you don't have air conditioning or, some kind of good ventilation. So for that part, there are like specific programs that are developed, but we have identified that as a priority area. And then for the other groups, we are more focusing on them via communication maybe than trying to identify exactly where they are.
And I mean, from our side, we've yet to do much work on this, but the strategy in general is, I mean, we have quite an extended welfare state and lots of institutions that are interfacing with these groups, and the strategy will be to primarily use those first, to not create new systems that will run in parallel. And I mean, some of the groups probably will be more difficult to reach than others, and we will have to have a strategy for those we can't reach as well. But it's a good question.
And I can also add that when it comes to pregnant people, for instance, I think we haven't mapped them so far, and it's hard because people aren't pregnant, all the time, but you can use proxy indicators, like, for instance, women between a certain ages, and so on. So maybe that's a way to develop our index in the future.
Thank you, everyone, for your input on this. I think this is a very interesting question, and maybe some people in the audience have some insights on that as well. But I will first take one question from the chat. So it's Eloisa Stella asking this question, working with the Italian Patient Association Novilunio, where they assist people with dementia and their families. And Eloisa's question is, in the mapping of vulnerability, there is also a specific approach on how to reach and involve vulnerable communities that are harder to reach and involve. So actually, this is very similar to what Matilda just asked. For example, older population, people living with disabilities, etc. So I don't know if you have any insights on also those categories of people. So rather older population and people with disabilities. I see, Ludwig, you have your hand raised. Maybe you want to say something.
Yeah, I mean, it's one question which I think was the one Matilda was asking, is how to help them during a heat wave. But I think this question also, it kind of targets how to communicate about their needs. And I think that's something we will have to do soon as well, because as Matilda was mentioning, when she was out actually interviewing and spending a lot of time with the communities that are mapped as vulnerable, the understanding of what they actually needed and what we thought they needed was we got a lot more detailed understanding of that. So I think we will have to do that sort of work with many of the communities in the city so that we target the right people with the right interventions and can help them in a way that they actually need. So I think it's a very good point. To my knowledge, we haven't done that much in Malmö. But maybe in Valencia.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Eloisa, for the question. I think that the answer is, or my answer at least would be, that the way to do that is through associations like yours. So, for instance, for this shelter for homeless people, the city council does not manage it directly. It does it through an agreement with Red Cross, with the Spanish Red Cross and the Valencia office, because they are used to working with homeless people and to help them so they know the right way to reach them and engage them. And for other European projects or for other European project proposals, what we have always tried to do is to involve associations who are in direct contact with the vulnerable groups we are targeting. So they help us to reach them, and they help us to reach them or they become kind of their speakers. No? So because some of these people might not be And if your association is working with people with dementia, then you would probably know that better than me. Maybe these people themselves are not able to really express their needs or difficulties, but people taking care of them, maybe, for instance, their families are the ones that should be like the target, no? Like the proxy to reach them in this case.
Thank you, Emilio. I think this is a very good point. And it's also something that I think keeps coming up in these discussions, how it is important to engage with the groups that are already active on the territory and with these different parts of the population. There was a hand raised as well, so I would leave now Emma Greer the chance to ask her question.
I actually have an experience to share. So I'm Emma Greer. I work for C40 Cities, and I'm working alongside our colleagues at the City of Milan in the Urban Resilience Department. And I wanted to share an experience around adaptive capacity. So returning to this question of cultural, social, or human adaptive capacity that Manu brought up earlier. We are experimenting with a framework put together by the Z Zurich Foundation to measure resilience at the community scale. So we chose a community of roughly 19,000 inhabitants to evaluate their level of resilience across a number of capitals, including human and social resilience. So human resilience, how aware people are of the risk of climate change, what to do during a heat wave, basic knowledge of first aid, social capital being more, how much do they trust the local authorities? Or have they been involved in the creation of Milan's air and climate plan, of their heat action plan, etc.? How much do they trust law enforcement, emergency services? How much do they trust their neighbors? Now, this is not a light undertaking. We had people surveying 260 community members in the hottest week of the year this summer, which is not something I think any city would take on lightly for every community in their jurisdiction. But we've done it for one community with interesting outcomes, and that is helping us to put together an action plan that targets the individual areas where this specific community could use some support. And so that human and social capital is one of 5, the other capitals being physical, or the physical infrastructure of the community, natural, access to green spaces, how they are maintained, etc., and financial resources to prop up this community in a disaster or an extreme weather event.
Thank you, Emma. Since this is very interesting, it'd also be fantastic if you could perhaps in the chat share a reference to this framework that you have been using with the Zurich Foundation. That would be, yeah, so that we can keep it and also share it with participants. Ludwig, did you want to react to this input, perhaps?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we very much would like to hear more about that. And I think a place where we could not do that in depth, maybe when we are looking at these most vulnerable communities that have been identified, maybe looking at these different adaptive capacities, maybe in a less deep way, but still so we understand what these communities have and don't have when we design the kind of, if we're going to do, for instance, urban greening of an area, maybe there is important knowledge to be had about trust with the police and social community that will then inform how we design it and what we do it. So anything you can send us would be greatly appreciated. Thanks.
And you have our email addresses in the chat. So
it's a really great connection. And I think, and I'm pretty sure that there is a lot more people in this meeting that would be very interested in that. So if you also want to share some resources that we can then somehow ping pong back to the participants in the follow-up email, I think that would be fantastic. I will take one last question that has been put in the chat, and then I would suggest we move to the next block. So the question from Simone Marchetti is whether the analysis also took into account a tree equity index. So, for example, including factors such as proximity to green areas and their role in cooling.
I mean, I can quickly answer that. That yes, we had proximity to green areas, canopy cover, and heat levels in each district. That was the kind of environmental factors that came into our index. And then we also had those socioeconomic status factors and health factors. That was age and sick days. So we had all three that were equally weighed into the index.
Thank you for your reply, Ludwig. Okay, maybe I'll just make an exception to what I just said that would move to the next, because there's maybe one question that can be answered quite quickly and I think could be interesting from a colleague from the Malmö City Planning Office in Sweden. So Emilio, what type of urban morphology have you identified as the most vulnerable to heat? Maybe we can have a quick answer to this before we move on.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. For that part, we work based on the local climate zones model. So I will also share now in the chat like a reference for that, because that's a model that has not been developed by us, but it's a very interesting work by several researchers, and that has been applied across the world. So it's quite a simple model. It is based on density, it establishes like different build types or different land cover types for a city, and based on building height, building density, and then obviously also the abundance of trees or other green areas. So yeah, I mean, based on this model, basically the one that is like more vulnerable is like the compact high-rise model. So it's a model where you have like more buildings, very dense, few open spaces, but it's very important. It's very interesting. If you can, I will share the link, because what this model is doing is taking into account all the different factors such as the albedo or the heat production inside the city itself and things like that in order to develop the whole model.
Thank you, Emilio. I think that would be great resources. I would perhaps ask Laura to share your screen again so that we can move to the next block. And I also know that Ludwig, you unfortunately have to leave very soon. So, but maybe you can start presenting, or you'll divide the task with Emmanuel, I guess.
Yes, I'll take our intervention here, and then I have to serve my politicians, which is what you have to do in city government sometimes. So if we can have the slides for the next phase. Our colleagues at ICLE had a very good kind of division of these questions, and but we are moving through back and forth between these different questions. And if you stick to the next slide, we haven't really done kind of targeted communications with our citizens yet, but are very curious to know how we'd go about that. So it's mostly been during the heat waves that we send out these recommendations for correct behavior or heat mitigation behavior to our citizens. But some things that we've been thinking about is that when we focus on this type of vulnerability, I think that's the correct choice, but one risk could be that we miss communities that are not vulnerable per se, but might have a higher chance of adapting bad heat behavior, so to say. So if we take my kind of demographic group, young men, we might say that, okay, no, this is not a problem for us with heat. So we go out running and we make these really bad decisions, and then we suddenly create vulnerability in ourselves. So that's something I've been thinking about, whether we should try to always ask ourselves the question, who will become vulnerable based on their behavior, not just based on their person. So that's something we're thinking about. And it was interesting, the example from Milan that also touched on this issue of kind of social community and social infrastructure, because that's something we see that's maybe different throughout Europe, what level of kind of community there is in neighborhoods. And in Sweden, we've also had quite a transformation of how you live and whether you are staying in one place for a long time and then also know your neighbors and create a community. We are moving towards more of a kind of isolated, fragmented community in cities where people don't know their neighbors as much. Local associations are kind of losing members and becoming less relevant. And I think from a heat resilience perspective, that creates some challenges in trying to coordinate who will then knock on the doors of the elderly in the community and who knows which people might need help. So we're also kind of thinking about ways we could facilitate this social network through heat resilience, and whether there are interesting projects around Europe that have tried to create this kind of interaction. We would be very happy to hear more about that. But if we go to the next slide. I mean, we at least we think that in Valencia there might be more of a heat culture, given that you have experienced extreme heat for a longer time, and would be very interested to hear if you have ways of then fostering this heat culture within your citizens.
Yes, thank you, Ludwig. And you can move to the next slide, please. And I think that we do have, no, previous one, sorry. It was not refreshing for me yet. So the one that, nope, there is one missing in the middle that starts with heat culture, number 22. And well, I can start speaking on that in the meantime. So I think we have a heat culture. If you look at our architecture, for instance, then we have blinds and shutters in every traditional window. And I was thinking about that when you were mentioning about how your law requires like the kind of light that needs to go into the building. And we also have adapted our costumes, for instance, and even our festivals. So one of the most important festivals in the city is during July, and we call it the July Fair. And this July Fair is most of the activities, or many activities, are developed in the evening or at night, because it's not a good idea to develop them just like after lunch, because as somebody is saying in the chat, people should be having siesta at that time. But there are also local customs beyond siesta. So for instance, thank you now, that's the slide, thank you. Because as you can see on the bottom in the middle, in many Mediterranean towns, people gather outside in the evenings to enjoy the cool air. And this is a tradition known as a la fresca in Valencia, so kind of like cooling off outdoors. And if you do it by the sea, as they are doing in the picture, it's much better. So this is things that are like usual for us, and I haven't thought about that as our heat culture until we were preparing this meeting, but now I realize that this is our heat culture. And also for traditional drinks, such as the horchata that you can see there. So in Valencia, we were drinking vegetal milks before it was cool, because they are like a way for us to refresh ourselves. So this is made with chufa, with tiger nut. and it's a cool drink, and it's like one of the most traditional things here. So we, our traditional drinks are not hot, are cool. And if you move to the next slide now, please. We have a heat culture, but I don't think that we have a heat culture that is ready for this heat. And I think you don't need to know Spanish to understand this slide. You can see the world record a lot. You can see graphs with increasing trends. You can see thermometers. And I think that you can get, the vibe of what's going on. And last few summers have been very tough here. Lots of tropical nights, maximum temperatures records, average records. So like very difficult for us to stand, and very difficult for us that we are supposed to be used to heat, but not to this heat. So we need to do something about that. And the next slide, please. One of the things that we have been doing in this regard is first training ourselves, and then training other local stakeholders, working directly for public authorities or working in NGOs or working in different places, so they know more about heat adaptation and summer energy poverty. So with this training program that we developed thanks to the Culturate project, we designed two different educational pathways, one targeting individual scale interventions, household actions, and then the other one focused on public space, on neighborhood scale, on community interventions. We developed that in collaboration with university and NGOs. And interestingly, maybe for some of you, this was funded by the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub of the European Union, because for us, energy poverty is more and more a problem related to summer and not to winter. Our highest electricity consumption in the city is during summer because of the air conditioning and ventilators and all these devices. And for us, when people suffering energy poverty is suffering the most is during summer because of this heat that we have. And thanks to this Culturate project, in the next slide, you can see some of the actions that we have started to develop from our energy offices. So the energy offices are our one-stop shop for energy transition, that we manage them from the Valencia Clima y Energía Foundation. And one of the things that we have been developing is participatory mapping. And so we have working with the neighbors in different neighborhoods of the city, trying to map their strategies to cope with heat, trying to identify with them which are the cool parts of the neighborhood. Where do they go in a heat wave, or where do they, avoid to stay, or which path they cannot take when it's very hot because, there is no shade and you cannot stand that. So we have carried out and planned in 2024 various mappings. And it's important not only to raise awareness, but also because we get very interesting information that could be potentially integrated into our climate shelter network that I will present later, or other adaptation actions. And in the previous slide, this one. And so for this heat culture, we have also started to develop some specific actions, and such as workshops or just publishing tips, as you have there. So these workshops are developed also in our energy offices and are trying to make people aware of the impact of heat on health and how the state of the housing stock, and this is something that the Malmo colleagues were also commenting earlier, influences how you experience heat, and trying to explain people how they can do some, self-diagnosis in their houses, to identify even which solutions to heat they should take. And we have been also trying to do this with a low-tech approach, because also we are worried that, if at the end everybody in Valencia ends up by installing air conditioning and using it all the time, this is maladaptation, and this is going to produce even more, electricity and more heat on the streets. So yeah, we need to go to another options. And yep, I think that was all from our side. And now is the time to hear from the audience.
Thank you very much, Emilio. Maybe we can stop sharing now so that we can see each other again. Yes, thank you. I would, I would like to open a bit the space for discussion if anybody has any questions on what was presented. Emmanuel, you can start.
Yeah, it's luxurious to be in that panel, so your questions always get answered. But I was super curious, Emilio. You mentioned that you've been mapping movements of people during heat waves. So I was just curious about how this was carried out and what findings you've made.
Yeah, so these participatory mapping activities have been developed at several neighborhoods of the city. So in each one, we just, were preparing this event and announcing it and reaching local associations from the neighborhood to try to engage them, and then meeting on the neighborhood. And sometimes what you can do is you do like a first session in the office, and then, people goes walking out for a bit, maybe in one group, maybe in different groups, depending on how many people there is there. And then after, seeing the neighborhood and thinking about it, all the people that lives there, you get back to the office, you get in front of this map, this large map, and then you start discussing. And it's interesting because, sometimes you see an aerial photograph in a map or Google Maps or wherever, and you see, a street with some trees, and you think, okay, it's good, this street has shade. But then when you are at street level walking across it, then you notice that these trees are really not providing shade, or that, shade is going in the middle of the road where the cars go by and not in the area where people is walking. And maybe you see like, lots of things like that. And people is aware when they are on the street of these kind of things. And then when you are reflecting later in front of the map, it helps you like to see, okay, I don't go through this street in summer, or, I need to go like that other way, or we have this public square, or we have this, park for children, which is not used. Maybe for, 3 months or 4 months, because there is not enough shade there and it gets really, really hot. So it's a different way of experiencing the street and analyzing it together with the people, because, some of these things you can see when you are walking, but if you are doing that with people from the neighborhood, then you get their experiences there.
Thank you. That's super good. Just keeping it simple and not complicating the matter. Thank you.
Thank you both. I would like to read out a comment from the chat, and there's 2 interventions, and then actually in the interest of time, maybe we can move to the 3rd block so that we can make sure that you get a chance to present all your insights, and then we can still have a conversation at the end. So someone in the chat is writing from the Valencia context and pointing to the big problem of lack of ventilation, air conditioning, or fans in kindergartens and elementary schools. Kids suffer and sometimes have lower results and lack of motivation, and because of this issue. And also during the month of August, many low-income families have to take kids to work as all schools are closed. And instead of having less public transport in summer, this person thinks that we would need more actually to avoid people having to wait in the heat. And I think this is a very, very fair point, and probably much underlooked by public authorities. If you have any quick reaction to that, feel free to raise it. Emilio, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, totally agree. And this is also I didn't have time to touch on that, but this is also a priority for us. And with this Fair Local Green Deals project, one of the things that we have done is to develop a participatory diagnosis project process in the 3 public schools that are managed directly by the city council. And this was primarily focused on the schoolyards and on heat, and like to see how the different areas of the schoolyard are used, by whom, during which part of the year, in order to identify and envision all the future scenarios and all the work that needs to be done in these schoolyards. So the students can use them, because it's actually a problem. I totally agree, and we need to work not only on the schoolyards but also on the whole facilities of the schools, buildings, everything. It needs to be improved, and yeah, I also agree with the public transport part.
Yeah. Thank you, Emilio. There is one intervention in the chat. Sorry, Laura.
Just to spot that there is also someone that shared an experience in the Q&A.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay.
I was going to read that out because I think it's a good actually link to the next part. So Federica from the Italian Red Cross wanted to share a recent experience of a project called Oasi, developed in the Red Cross Committee of Opera near Milan. With the support of a foundation, they have installed a cold machine using renewable sources in one of their committees to improve the psychophysical well-being of the vulnerable population. This environment will welcome the local vulnerable population, offering refreshment and more social and health services during the hot summer months. We also have held courses to raise awareness among the population on the climate and energy crisis. And I think this is a good link to the next topic, actually, because we're going to talk about climate shelters and also ideas on how to perhaps improve these. So maybe thank you, Federica, for sharing this experience. And I would just, leave the floor to Emmanuel.
Thank you very much. And we can go to the next slide. So we've been talking about Malmo and Sweden being in the beginning of this journey, and that's why we have so much questions for you guys in Southern Europe and Valencia in particular today. But the way we handle heat waves is when they hit, or when we know that they are going to hit, we have some routines and warning systems coming from the national government. We have routines in home care and in schools, and generally in the parts of our operations that are feeling the effects of the heat wave. Just this September, we had a very late heat wave, and a couple schools in the city actually had to close down because the indoor temperatures were so high that they deemed it unfit for education. So we are starting to feel that our routines aren't really enough, and we need to work more with preparedness rather than just planning more than preparedness. But we can go to the next slide. So we have some ideas on how to tackle this in Malmo, because we have a cold climate. So of course we've been working with a type of shelters during the winter time for homeless people, for instance. And an idea is to kind of copy this way of working and then create cooling shelters instead. But this has not been done to the extent of my knowledge so far. So we're really interested to hear more about how you're working when the heat wave actually hits. So the question for Valencia is, what is the role of different actors, such as the city or the regional or national level, and how do you coordinate your work during a heat wave?
Yes, thank you, Emmanuel. So what we do have in Valencia is at regional level a heatwave program, which is prepared every year by the Public Health Department. So you were mentioning earlier that in Malmo you have like an early warning system or more like a national level. So here our early warning system is part of this heatwave program. So the program general objective is to reduce the impact on health associated with high temperatures. It includes preventive actions, but mainly the most important part for us probably is this early warning system. You have the link there. It's not working right now because it's deactivated after summer, but after next year you could check it and find it. And what you can see is the kind of information that you see on the slide. We have this is our region, the Valencia region, with each polygon there is a municipality, and each municipality is coded according to the legend that you see there. So in green, you can see the places where there is no risk, and then, increasing risk according to heat. And this is established according to the maximum temperature forecast for the following days. And this is done at regional level, and then they send at each municipality warnings when the risk level is low, medium, or high, and different actions are developed. And in the next slide, you can see that what we have in the city of Valencia now at local level is a communication and coordination protocol in the event of a heat wave. And what this establishes is, okay, what should we do internally in Valencia City once we receive this kind of warnings from the regional system? It establishes which actions have to be carried out by each department for each level of risk. And also it includes the messages to be communicated to the public and the channels to be used. So for instance, you can see there the screenshots. We have a municipal official app in our mobiles. And one of the interesting things that we have is that we receive these warnings when there is a tropical night coming or when there is like a high or medium risk day in relation to this early warning system. So we receive it there and we can go and check and see the information. We also have like public displays in the street or in the bus where there are also some screens. These are like the channels that are used. So it's a matter not only of coordinating internally and knowing which has, social services department to do or what has other sports services to do, but also how we communicate the different levels of alert to the people. And one of the things that have been also integrated into these response protocols that we have at the municipality is our new climate shelters network. So this was created this year by a joint motion by the social services and climate change councillors in May. It's interesting from my perspective that it's a joint motion from these two different departments of the municipality, and it's like acknowledging that climate change is also an issue that needs to be taken into account specifically by social services departments. And we developed a consultation and collaboration process with different municipal departments and the local public sector, so we could identify which would be the first facilities in this climate shelters network starting this summer in what we call our first stage. It has been kind of a pilot stage. And finally, we have 3 public libraries, 3 social services centers, and then the 4 facilities that Valencia Clima y Energía, where we manage directly. So we developed staff information and training activities. We developed a communication and awareness raising campaign, also including actions in the climate shelters. As you can see there in the picture, we prepared a monitoring plan to be able to record the use of these spaces. And we are still working on that. We are basically taking into account the future scaling up of the network. We need to incorporate new indoor and outdoor facilities by 2025 for next summer. we want to review our activation protocols, because right now this shelters network for this first summer, what we decided was that it would just be activated when there is a red alert, so like the highest kind of alert that we have. And we also think that we need to create support material and educational and entertainment activities, because these are places in which people is just not going to, go and sit down and stay without doing anything. They need to have something to do there, either develop entertainment activities or have, some materials there that they could use. So we need to work on that so the network can slowly increase and improve its functioning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a lot and super interesting, all of it. Just had some super general questions if we have time, Erika. How's our time schedule looking?
We have another 7 minutes and we can just make the most of it. So feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, so just a very general question then. So like what recommendations would you have for us just starting out this work, thinking about creating these climate shelters? Have you had some like general learnings from what you've done?
Yes, good question. What we did was, but maybe for you it's a different focus, because maybe you are thinking more about using your heating shelters also for cooling, and maybe it's like a different pathway. For us, we had to start like developing, like identifying and mapping all the indoor and outdoor spaces in the city that could work as shelters. Then we produce like kind of a roadmap with the support of the policy support facility of the Covenant of Mayors. So like, okay, we have this inventory, we know which spaces could be used. What do we do now? So we prepare like a roadmap, and then what we decided was to start, as I said, with a first stage, just with a few places, and trying to do lots of consultations, lot of dialogue with all the departments that manage these places, because we have been working just with public spaces, and public spaces managed by the city council itself, not managed by other administrations, which we could have also done. And then from there, we have to scale up. One thing that we have learned is that it's not easy for us like to increase the opening hours of these spaces. So, for instance, libraries, public libraries, for me are like a wonderful place for this, because you have things to do, you have places to be sitting, you have, all the things that we have identified that you need in these places, such as, having access to a toilet, having air conditioning, of course, etc., etc. But the problem that we have, for instance, is that many of these public libraries are closed during August in Valencia. And the ones that are open are just open until, 2 a.m., 2 p.m., sorry. And it's very difficult to be able to change that. So, I don't know, we have tried this way. One thing to take into account could be that other option to start could be even like a smaller scale, but over spaces on which you have like a very, very high control. So there was a very nice initiative in Madrid this summer where and it was not promoted by the city council. It was kind of a private initiative, but it was like El Círculo de Bellas Artes, like a space for arts that decided that was going to work as a climate shelter during the summer. And then they were doing lots of activities, a very nice place, having also like the opportunity. So if you were going on holidays, you could take there your plants and they would take care of them while you were away, and developing lots of activities. So instead of going, and we went to 10 places, and I think it's very few places for a city the size of Valencia, but Madrid is much bigger than Valencia, and they had this one. But I think it was also a very nice option, because you get the opportunity, if you get this very high control over the place, and you can develop lots of activities, you can like try to get a lot of visibility for it. And I think it's also like a very nice way to do this pilot test, or just to raise awareness and start discussing this. I will share now in the chat the link to this initiative in Madrid.
Thank you, Emilio. Yeah, I think. Do we have questions in the chat? I won't take up all the time then.
Not at the moment. Emilio, you have your hand raised again. Do you want to?
Yeah, I want to make a question, because I also had like lots of questions for the Malmo colleagues, but since people has already also been active and there were not much time, I didn't want to take the space. But I was curious to hear more about your protocols in relation to, as you said, not using the warmest schools and preschools. So how do you have like sensors there, like measuring in real time, and where, and what do you do with the students of these schools? Are they sent to other schools? Should they stay at home? And it was very interesting to see.
Yeah, I think we don't have. I mean, our policy framework is not like following suit with the changing climate. These issues are very new for us. So the schools that had to close down, they were all quite newly built. They didn't have a lot of green trees that were grown up next to them, giving shade. Also, I think that ventilation was underdimensioned, because they didn't realize there were going to be that many kids in every classroom and stuff like that. But the only regulation we have that the supervisor of the school can kind of point to be able to close it down is like workspace laws and regulations, and whether or not it's too hot or not in a workplace, it's very loosely regulated. It's kind of up to the management of a workplace to decide, okay, this work environment is not suitable, and in this case the decision to close down the school was up to like the management of the school, and I don't think we had any children had to be sent home, because I don't think we had any like spare school or classrooms to put them in. So we don't really have a system for it yet. So it's vulnerable.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. I think this is would be interesting to see how this evolves as well. It is almost painful having to close this meeting actually, but we have come to 11:30. But yeah, thank you for this quite an exceptional exchange of knowledge and experiences. We will do our best to capture all of this and send a follow-up with all the resources, and also really try to write down all these learnings so that they can be available for further reflections. And yeah, just wanted to say really a big thanks to Emilio, Emanuel, Matilda, and also Ludwig that just left. Thank you for preparing all of this content and just sharing these resources and insights with all of us. And we'll be in touch for sure. Again, I hope this was helpful for you as well and for the audience. As you leave the room, feel free to just click on this last poll. We would like to hear from you whether the session was useful, and if you feel like you've learned something in particular, you want to summarize it in a keyword. Just you can take a few seconds to do that before leaving. But yeah, other than that, thank you very much again